I'm Sven. I was 3 months in artist in residence here in Birmingham and research about urban development. I'm really interested in site-specific work, to come to another place and look what's maybe the identity of the place and what is this special in this space or place. I researched about this ongoing redevelopment on the Paradise Circus, and I was surprised that this right now the central library, the old central library of Birmingham, gets demolished, and it's, I think, a controversial discussion. So I thought about, okay, in some months the old library is not visible in the city landscape, but it's only visible through images then. And I thought about to keep something from this central library and make a huge rubbing of one of these typical concrete walls and bring it back into a book. I like this idea of to create maybe a circle about the central library was an archive for books, and now it gets demolished, and the rubbing for me is also to create a kind of an archive of a part of the central library and to keep them in the book again. So that's for me the past of the visual image of Birmingham, that there are a lot of maybe buildings which are already demolished and also in the future gets demolished and only visible through images or rubbings in my case. I create for this exhibition in here, in this Glenn Howells office, a hoarding, which for me is really typical at the moment in the visual image of Birmingham, because there are a lot of big master projects which redeveloped or renewal the city center, and there are a lot of construction working around the city center, and that's why you have a lot of hoardings around the city, and that's also a part for me as a symbol for that there's something in the process of change, and the hoarding as a symbol for change in my exhibition, which is here in this office, a bit out of the context, because there's no construction work in the office ongoing here, and it gets this alien art object which maybe creates an other view. Behind the hoarding I arranged 3 concrete posts which are sitting a raven on it, and for me this is an ambivalent symbolic figure, the raven, because on the one hand side it's to keep the memories, and on the other side it's also a warden of the deaf, and that's related for me as also as a symbol related to me to this example of the central library. What is the future about the visual image from Birmingham? And I thought, okay, what's the future? It's not visible at the moment, and I built up an architecture model which shows the idea of the future. And I read in my residency time in Birmingham a headline which was Birmingham and the Bulldozer, and I really like this this headline because it says that there is a connection between Birmingham and the bulldozer, and the bulldozer is something to demolish something, but if something gets demolished, it also creates a space for something new. And I found a woodcraft toy for children where they can construct a bulldozer as such wood shapes. And so I like this woodcraft toy because you have both sides in this object. One side is it's a bulldozer which is for deconstruction, and on the other side it's for the children and they can construct something. And so this only the shapes of this woodcraft toy. I have used them to build up a new architecture. And in this architecture there's on the ground floor with a backlight a sentence written down. It's a quote from a German writer, Theodor Storm, and the book is called The Rider of the White Horse. And this, in this book there's a story about the dike, and there's this old tradition to put a child or a dog or a cat inside of the dike to make it safe for the future. And I like this story because there is the relationship with Birmingham. In the Curzon Street station there was found, I think in the 80s, a mummified cat under the floor, and the, people also think that it was a Victorian architectural ritual to put a cat under the floor of the building to make it safe for the future. So I combined in this way this woodcraft toy with the story of this to make something safe for the future. There are, for me, I think, especially in these times, a lot of big projects and a lot of changes in the city. So I was thinking about what's the architecture and the identity of Birmingham, and what is the visual image of Birmingham. And so for me it was maybe a bit surprising how fast, or I have the feeling that the processes are really fast, because especially with this central library in the 70s, which was built from John Maiden, and it's only a 40 years old building, and now it gets been demolished and a new one, new development is going on there. And I was surprised that it was the same discussion in the 70s with the same controversial discussion about to demolish the Victorian houses. And there is, for me, I have the feeling there's maybe a repetition in renewal of urban development. So I was interested in this and develop a work which symbolized, in a way, this visual image of Birmingham, and there are 3 parts of my work which represents the past, present and future. And I want to ask, what do you think as an architect? Is this maybe a special theme in Birmingham because of the big project, or is it in general in the UK?
I think Birmingham's slightly different to most other cities in that it's defined itself through sudden bursts of change. So the first huge change was in the 19th century, because before that it was a small settlement, maybe 30,000 people in 1830s, and then it grew to being 1 million people by 1850 or thereabouts, roughly the same size it is now. Then in the 20th century it tore down much of the Victorian and put in the inner city ring road, the motorway system, the inner city ring road, and then the buildings around it, and that was a huge change. And now we've taken that down, and our new idea is to take that and to turn it into a pedestrian city, and so with great big buildings such as New Street Station. And so we have been in a process of revolution in the city, not evolution, for the last 200 years. I think that does have an effect on the psyche of people living here, because there is I think a need in people's perception and understanding of a place to have permanence. And I think this sort of constant large-scale changing makes people interested in it, because they want to know, I think most people want to attach to something which is more permanent. I don't think many people enjoy the idea of constant change, because cities are about providing an environment which you then belong to, and you can then increase and add to its culture over many generations. So I think it's that the speed at which Birmingham has changed is an interesting thing, but personally I think it's a negative thing. I think what Joseph Chamberlain did in the 1870s was to lay some foundations which should have paved the way for what we're doing now. So I don't think that big change, starting it again every 50 years, is a very good idea. And I think people's interest And the reason that you had the interesting conversations is probably because I think what you've tapped into is beneath the surface a wish amongst many citizens to start to build something which is long-lasting and evolves rather than changes through sudden sort of massive projects. And I think one of the important roles that a city plays is to provide continuity between generations. I think we've got a psychological need from our environment to have things which are longer lasting than people.
Yeah, yeah.
Because otherwise, how do you judge your family, your heritage, your culture? When there is huge scale change, and especially in times of uncertainty, we regard our cities as some sort of permanent anchor for our civilization. So the city's it's got a much more important role than just a functional workplace economic driver.
Yeah.
It's got a really important job of providing identity and continuity for our culture.
Yeah. Okay. And maybe what do you think about your role as an architecture? Because I thought sometimes Birmingham is a great place for architecture, because I have the feeling you have a lot of opportunities here, or the possibilities to build up something new. Because I don't know exactly, but my feeling is that maybe the government or the city council is open, minded to have something new, and which is a great opportunity maybe for an architect.
I think
but at the same time, but in the same time, I think as an architect, you also think about what is maybe right now in this city center or in the urban space, and how you deal with this old heritage architecture to build something new, or
Well, there's a couple of questions in there.
Yeah, sorry.
Regarding the heritage aspect, I think in Birmingham we have got some very fine elements of the city which we ought to work with, and we are working with, and whole districts such as the Jewellery Quarter and certain parts of Digbeth, predominantly 19th century. We haven't got much before that. We've got a few pieces, but it's some of our finest heritages of the 19th century, which was its period of establishing itself as a proper industrial city. In terms of the question about, as an architect, and the relationship to the city and this ability to make new things, or whether it should be about making, preserving some of the old, for me, the big question for Birmingham is whether it wants to be a collection of landmark buildings or be a landmark city. That's the big challenge for Birmingham. And I think, actually, Birmingham hasn't got that. The great cities, that we would probably agree on, don't have too many landmarks or iconic buildings per hectare.
Yeah.
You don't need a lot of those buildings. What you do need is fantastic context, which is dense, which is interesting, which then shapes public space. Too many parts of this city are torn apart still with surface car parks. One of the big mistakes we made in the 1960s and 70s was taking down whole sides of roads. So Digbeth High Street, Derry End High Street, one side of it was demolished and still is ragged. The whole of Bristol Street, one side was taken out and it was stretched into being 6 lanes wide. That's what we've been doing, is pulling apart through the highways, pulling apart the distances between buildings. I think a real important thing we need to do is put terrace buildings back and start to create a proper enclosure in the city. Some of the best examples are along Colmore Row at the moment and around Cornwall Street. That district of the city is probably the most intact historic area because it does what many parts of great cities do. It has terrace buildings which are different, but then it lines streets, and then those streets occasionally open out into a square or into a park. So I think what we ought to be doing is putting back some of those very simple moves, which is to put the edges back to the city. Everywhere, most places you look, outside of the city centre core, it's been absolutely blown apart in terms of not having containment, not having the edges.
For me also, my feeling in Birmingham was that it's not so big, the city centre. It's a small part of the city, of a big city.
Yeah.
But when you are on the edges of the city centre with the inner ring road, there's a really hard cut to the next districts, because also it's like here.
The 19th century city, which was 1 million people, stretched from the top of the jewellery quarter as being the city centre all the way down to Edgbaston. It was 800 hectares of land. What the ring road did in the 1960s was to quarterise the centre, which was only 80 hectares. So it put a line around the middle and then distorted that as being the city centre. The Victorian city centre was the full 800 hectares. So the idea of the big city plan, which we've influenced, is to then reconnect and to dilute and eventually make the inner city ring road that device which separates the 80 from the 800 to make it disappear. And then we regrow the city centre to its original size.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then you don't have to just take out the motorway. What you've also got to do is then create the density and continuity of city centre experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, just as a visitor to our city, and because I live here and I work here, I'm probably blind to many of the things that you see. What is different about Birmingham than other cities that you've seen? If you were to describe 2 or 3 things, what would they be?
Yeah. So it's also, yeah, it's a view from a visitor, because I'm not absolutely sure if, because I'm only staying here for 3 months.
Yeah.
What was impressed me was, or when I think about the visual image, maybe I have the feeling in Germany there's a lot of thinking in the most towns about the heritage, the architecture heritage of the city. Yeah. And I think in sometimes too much, maybe. Yeah. I think this thinking about the heritage, or too much thinking about the heritage, could be stop some process of renewal. So, and that's why I was, I think, surprised how maybe Birmingham deals with the urban development, because I have not the feeling that they are so much thinking about the heritage, more about renewal and to build something new in the city and to change the city. And so that was the first thing which impressed me, and also I think that's brings me to my work, which I done here, because, so for example, the hoarding in our background, I built it up because for me this is a manifestation or a symbol in Birmingham right now for the process of change. Yeah. Because I see so many hoardings, and maybe this is also one thing which are the people maybe blind in the city, because it's absolutely normal in a way that this is a hoarding in front of a building which gets demolished or reconstructed or something like this. But I think for me it's a symbol. The hoarding would be built when a demolition starts, and rebuilt when the new building is there. And there's this time between. And so that's why I decided to build up the hoarding here, because, and also think, okay, now here it's like an alien object, and not, it has not this function as a hoarding in this office room here. Now it's out of the context, and for me that's the, I hope that the people are maybe think then about this object, why is a hoarding here, and what's the symbol of the hoarding. And so that's for me a sign of the present, and which I maybe recognize or when I go through the city. Other thing was, which impressed me was this, this Paradise Circus redevelopment, and also which I say at the beginning, this repetition maybe of this controversial discussion, that it was in the 70s there and it is now there. And it's also for me, I think I don't want to decide if it's right to demolish the library, the old library, or is it good to demolish it to open the city. I think I'm not in the position to decide this, and but what was for me important, okay, it gets demolished, the decision is made, and to keep something from this and to have make this rubbing, which is for me a kind of to archive something from this old library.
Well, I think it's a very powerful thing to keep. A rubbing is far more powerful in a funny way than a photograph or an image of it, because it was physically in contact with the material at some point.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really interesting way of recording it. I think these are beautiful, by the way. These rubbings, I think they're fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
I also think I think this is very powerful. This emblem of Birmingham as being hoarding. I mean, it's a really interesting one. Is that what we see most of at the moment is hoarding. It's
Yeah.
what we live with.
Yeah.
It's our new architecture.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
our new emblem.
Yeah.
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 I wonder if in 100 years whether we will still be ripping the city apart at such a rate and trying to make it new. We've been in love in Birmingham with the modern, with the new, more than any other place I can imagine.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've always been fascinated by the new next thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's got an impatience about it,
Yeah.
which is a good thing in some ways, because I think without that you wouldn't have, I mean, some of the, if you look at the inventions that were made in Birmingham, especially in the 19th century, you need that sort of irritability and impatience to push and make things happen and to come up with new ideas. It's got a drive behind it. But what it sort of leaves behind is a bit of a sort of jet stream of debris.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it has done up until now.
Yeah.